your calling will always include others, not just yourself. It'll always be for the benefit of others, right? So if God is calling you to something, that call will benefit others, not just yourself.
Welcome to the Darren Earlywine Podcast, where we awaken you to become who you were born to be. Here's your host, Darren Earlywine.
Hey, welcome back to episode 8 of the Darren Earlywine Podcast. And here's the quote for today. Today, we're going to awaken you to do what you were born to do. Brand new tagline with changing everything. Brand new branding. That's the new tagline. Awakening you to do what you were born to do. Just kidding. That's a terrible tagline. We're not changing any branding or the tagline. I just want to set that in our minds of how much. I want you to think about this. When I said awaken you to do what you were born to do, did it make you feel anything? Did it make you feel any different than the actual tagline, which is awakening you to become who you were born to be? We're going to unpack that today because I think one of the greatest struggles that we work through, that we struggle with in stepping into God's purpose for our life, because we believe God has created you on purpose and for a purpose, is getting stuck between the tension between doing and being. And we're going to unpack that today. I've got an interview with one of my best friends since 1998. Okay, that's a long time ago. Some of you guys are listening. You were born in 1998. You're like, holy buckets, this guy's old. I am old, but I'm stoked to have Mark Moore, Dr. Mark Moore, on the podcast today. One of my best friends, he's a doctor. He is a doctor of theology and is a professor at William Jessup University in Sacramento, California, and also a pastor at Faith Legacy Church. He's an author, he's a podcaster, and we're going to go into the deep end of the pool today on the Darren Earlywine Podcast. Thanks for joining us. Crowd goes wild. We've got a huge studio audience here today. I want to thank everybody for downloading, subscribing, liking the podcast. I want to thank you for the reviews and the subscriptions that are coming in, whether it be on YouTube, Spotify, or on whatever podcast platform you get your podcasts on. It means so much to me that you're downloading and listening, and I love getting feedback from you. We got a mailbag today that we're going to jump into that was so encouraging, and I am stoked about what we're going to hit today. Busy couple weeks here in my life, and helping launch a church here in Fishers, Indiana is where we're at. We're actually in Indianapolis right now, the great city of Indianapolis, but I live in Fishers, helping launch a Mercy Road church. This is the 4th Mercy Road church in Indianapolis, and just so cool to see that in the midst of COVID, in the midst of everything, God is doing some really cool thing and changing people's lives, and really excited about being able to be a part of what God is doing and how it kind of dovetails into what we do here on the podcast. And those sermons that I will be preaching, I'll do 2 sermons a month out at Mercy Road, and pretty soon those are going to be available online, and we'll have to give some links for those if you want to see and stay up to date on some new content I'm putting out as far as sermon stuff, maybe be encouraging, awakening, inspiring to you. And we'll get that going here in the next couple of weeks. Those sermons will be live streamed on Sunday, and just a little extra piece of content for you out there. So anyway, we started today talking about, like it was a joke, bad joke, but that we're changing the tagline, right? To becoming, to doing, that we're here to awaken you to do what you were born to do. And this tension between being and doing is constant, and I don't know if it ever goes away. We love to talk about what we do. When we seek after God's will for our life, I would say most of the time, I don't know what the percentage, I can make a percentage up and say 90, but I'm just making it up. I'm saying a high percent of the time, we're talking about a career, we're talking about actions, we're talking about stuff that we do. When people come through the Spiritual DNA workshop, so often the questions we get is, okay, what's next? What am I supposed to do with this new knowledge I have about who God's created me to be? We want to know action. We want to know what to do. Here's the struggle, or here's the reality, I guess, that creates the tension, is you and I were created to exist as a human being in relationship with God first and foundational. You were created for life with God. I unpack this reality in the Spiritual Pathways session of Spiritual DNA. Skye Jethani has a great book called With, Reimagining Your Life with God. And this book was transformational for me. He lays out 4 paradigms that three paradigms that we falsely use to see our connection with God and the one that God actually created us for. He talks about life under God, where we feel like basically we're getting crushed by God's rules and his rage or his wrath. And so all of our life is to appease God and try to get out from underneath the weight of who he is. We have life from God, where basically we do what we think we should do to keep God happy, and we get God. God gives us what we want from him. Then we have life for God, where you feel like, well, listen, I'm really here just to serve God, for God to use my life, and I'm doing what I can for him. All of these, there's actually a fourth one that's negative, which is life above God, where basically kind of God's not real interested in what we're doing, and we're kind of more important than him anyway, and we kind of do our own thing, and maybe every once in a while appease him on Christmas and Easter. And all of these pursuits, all these paradigms Sky will talk about, they eventually disappoint us because they're a distortion of how God has actually created us, because we're not human doings, we're human beings. God has created us to live life with him. Now, are there things that he does for us? Are there things that we do for him? Are there desires of his heart, of the way he's created our life, and that we live, life more blessed, more at peace with him? Yeah, those things are realities, but the essence of what you're created for is life with God, existing with him, in relationship with him. The doing part is the second half. You get the joy, you get the privilege to partner with him and do stuff, which he's created you in advance to do. Ephesians 2 tells us that. That's great. That's what we help you discover in Spiritual DNA, but it is not who you are. You are a son or daughter of God, created to be in relationship with him. And I love that he talks about us being his sons and daughters, his family. Think about if you have kids, or even if you don't have kids yet and you aspire to have children, do you want to have kids so they can do stuff for you? I know it's good. I just made my 13-year-old mow the lawn this past week, and it was pretty awesome. I don't know if you've dad life out there, that the first couple of times you teach your kid to mow straight lines. And my favorite moment is my son Ty. It was about the fourth run down the front yard, and it was terrible. It looked like a drunken sailor was running around through the front yard. It was definitely a little weavy. And I taught him. I said, "Hey, here, do you know how to fix a messed up curve line?" He was like, "No, I have no idea." And it taught him how to fix the line for the next strip. And that next run down the front yard was so just ruler straight. It was beautiful. It was a great dad moment. But I don't have 3 sons so they can do stuff around my house. When my wife and I found out we were pregnant, I wasn't like, "Ooh, sweet, now I've got 3 people to do stuff with." I dreamed, or do stuff for me, I guess I should say. I dreamed about the things that we would do together. I dreamed about the memories we would have. I dreamed about life with them, and then getting to see them become the people that God had created them to be. Like, these were the aspirations and the joys that I had as a father, not here's the stuff I'm going to have my kids do. And if I, a really messed up, sinful, fleshly dad, can figure that much out, how much more our Heavenly Father, when he thinks of us, he doesn't see us as a slave that has to do stuff for him. He sees us as a son or daughter that get to do stuff with him, that exist to be in relationship with him. So what I want us to walk into today, and Mark is lay this out perfectly, and it's some powerful stuff in the interview with him, because what Mark's going to lay out is that he got out of college. Now he's become a doctor. He's doing cool things, right? But he had really no plan. He sensed a call of God on his life when he was 16. He graduated from college, did great in college, but had no plan of what he was going to do. He didn't have the 15-year plan of this is what I'm going to do, and this is God's will for my life, and this is the thing I'm going to step into, and this is what I'm doing. And what he's going to unpack for us is the beauty of not knowing the plan of God, but learning to trust the person of God. What am I supposed to do? Well, Mark says here, he says you're supposed to become the type of person that will follow God no matter where his plan leads. And he's going to unpack that idea, and I love that. Getting to the place where your focus is on who I'm becoming, and a lot of that is relationship with God and character development. Because the reality is, if we become the kind of person that trusts the character of God, we will also trust and follow the plan of God in our life. And I got a great email this week from someone, a podcast listener. I want to thank you for emailing. I didn't get permission to use your name, so I won't use your name here, but I appreciate you emailing. And the email, and basically they say, you know what, COVID may forever be known as the year that wrecked the world in many ways. But they go on to say, but for me, these months will forever be the days that transformed my life, because God has used this year to completely transform me from the inside out, and he's grown me, and he's set me free of strongholds that have been in my life for years, and he's just made me a new person who desires to be used by him. I want to unpack this for a second here, right? The beauty, the gold of your email is everything before you say desire to be used by him. That's a good outcome. I'm not saying it's bad. It's a good outcome. But listen how beautiful this sentence is. That God, right, has completely transformed you from the inside out. He's set you free from strongholds that have been in your life for years. And he's just made you a new person. That's being. That's existence. That is what you're created for. And then you get to do stuff with God. This person goes on and says, it's been an incredible journey, one that is only possible because of God and because I sure couldn't have changed on my own. I feel like all of this growth and all of this intentional time with him, that God has been preparing me for whatever he might have next for me in life. And I wish he would just go ahead and give me some awesome assignment. But instead, I'm still at a job I don't love, 10 years into it, arguing with God pretty regularly about why I'm here and where he might lead me next. So the concept of spiritual DNA fascinates me, and it excites me, though, because I'm not sure I have any idea how to use the gifts God has given me or the passions. And I'm honestly not even sure what those gifts or passions are. So I love this email and the honesty of it. Thank you so much for emailing. If you have emails, questions, send them in to Darren, D-A-R-O-N, Darren at blackbirdmission.com. I'd love to read them. I'd love to respond to you. And what I want to say to you that sent this email in is you're in a beautiful place, because you have taken this year where everything has stopped, everything has slowed down, and you have used this year to get to know who God is, to learn to trust his personhood, the relationship we have with him. Then we do get caught up with, okay, then now what do I have to do? Well, and you say, I'm stuck at this job and I want to do what's next. Mark's going to unpack in this podcast interview today the concept that we don't have to know 10 months, 10 years, 15 years down the road. What we need to do is come to the place where we become the kind of person that grows in trust with the heart of the Father, is connected with him in a relationship, and can respond to the next opportunity he gives us, that next one step forward. Time and time again in my life, I noticed that I could never have seen how the 10th step in the process came. And a lot of times it's the 10th step in the process that people give a lot of attention to. Oh man, how'd you get to do this? How'd you get this opportunity? And they want step 10, and they want God to give them step 10. But then you go back and you rewind, and you go, well, I was in this time of prayer and listening to God, and God nudged me for one step forward, which was do this. And then like 10 months or 10 years later, I just kept saying yes and trusting the little gentle nudges of the Holy Spirit, where he was leading, where he was guiding, where he was nudging the connections, the relationships. And then I got to do the things you're seeing me do. But it was the relationship, it was the being with God that led me into that. One of the things I thought about this is that we have the greatest commandment and we have the Great Commission. And notice that it's not reversed. It's not the greatest commission and then a pretty great commandment. The great commandment, right? The greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. You're created to be in relationship and love with God, to love him and to be loved by him. That's the greatest. Now, when you understand that, when you live in that and you come to trust him, then you get to be a part of the Great Commission. The Great Commission is then to go and make disciples, right? Baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and teach them everything that Jesus taught you. And he says, and therefore, right, and I'll go with you and be with you in this process to the very end of the age. We have to have the greatest commandment first, which is loving God. Then we get into the Great Commission, which is the stuff we get to do. And Mark and I will unpack this, and I want you thinking about this. Is here's the reality. If we get this reversed and we pursue doing over being, if we pursue the call of God, but we don't develop the character of God, here's what's eventually going to happen. we're going to sabotage our life. Let me say it again. If we pursue calling but don't develop character, we will sabotage our life, because eventually our character, our charisma will run out and our calling will be compromised. And this is a tough one. If you're a super introverted person and you're a little more like Mark and you like the contemplative things and you like to be kind of alone and think that maybe this is easier for you, I'm not sure. I just know for me is I was always drawn to the excitement. I was always drawn to the action. I'm an activist, one of my spiritual pathways. I'm an apostolic pioneer. I'm an ENFP. I'm an Enneagram 7. Like, I want to go. I want to create. I want to do. I want to get out there and make stuff happen. And what I know in my life is I really wish I would have become more passionate about character development, or become at least as passionate about character development as I was about pursuing calling. And I'm glad you're listening to the podcast. I'm glad that you are taking these steps to pursue calling, but I also hope that you're being inspired to develop that character, the character of God within you that proceeds as you grow in depth of relationship with him. And I don't know if you're like our listener that sent me the email, if you're concerned about maybe you're missing God's call in your life, I promise you, if you become the kind of person whose character has developed to the place where you trust the heart of God and you know the voice of God and you know how he guides and leads, you will never miss God's call in your life. If you know his character, you won't miss his calling. And Mark's going to unpack that. I'm so glad he's on the podcast, and I want to jump right to the interview now. When we come back, we're going to talk about a few more practical steps, but enjoy this conversation with my good friend, Mark Moore. It's going to be a good one. And before you jump in, maybe ask God, would you lead me to the next step of learning to trust your character, trust your personhood, so I don't miss the call that you have on my life. Enjoy this conversation with Mark Moore, and then we'll be right back. Hey, I'm stoked to sit down with one of my good buddies, Mark Moore. Mark, you're just Marky to me, but to the world, you're so much more. You're a professor of theology at William Jessup University in Sacramento, California. You're also on staff at Faith Legacy Church, an awesome church in Sacramento. And dude, it's been such a joy. We've been buddies literally since 1997, I think it was.
97, 98. I mean, yeah. I saw you in 96, 97, but we didn't really talk. We just kind of saw each other from across campus.
Yes.
You had your long lion hair.
Did have some hair.
You
wore a navy blue, like half trench coat, like pea coat.
Yeah, pea coat. Yeah, pea coat.
Literally every day.
Every day.
Even when
rain
it was
or
80.
shine. Yes. Yes. 100 degrees out. It doesn't matter. I'm rocking.
Anyway, we have been friends forever. We've traveled the world together. Literally, we were in a band together. And so I know probably too much about you, but what I want to get into, and vice versa. But what I want to get into today is talk about, and you grew up in a really small town in Indiana.
Yep.
You have a fairly big family. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
2 brothers and a sister, and your dad and mom were just, great American, dad blue collar, mom worked in the university setting. And it's interesting to me because you've gone from kind of just Midwestern roots to a trajectory that maybe, I would guess maybe as some people maybe in like junior high, maybe even high school would have met you. I don't know that they would have seen like that. Not only are you everything that we just said, but you're Dr. Mark Moore, you have your doctorate. I mean, like,
yeah.
In college professor, and you're an author, and you've done so many different pursuits. But what I kind of want to go through is just kind of walk through the process of you discovering a sense of calling and God's purpose in your life. Because I think so often, Mark, when I talk to people, and this phrase isn't original with me, but they suffer from what is called like a deficit of imagination.
Yeah,
is it's not that they wouldn't go after maybe something that God would call them to do. It's not that they don't have a desire to see their life be different, or maybe have a different outcome maybe than their parents did or something, but they just can't imagine that it's possible. And I kind of want to just dive into your journey and see, how did you maneuver through that, and how have you seen God begin to unlock some of that pathway to where you are today?
Yeah, and it is really interesting because growing up in Fairmount, Indiana, small town, hometown of James Dean.
That's
So
right. Hometown of
claim to
Cool.
fame. Yeah, hometown. It's where Cool was born.
Sure.
Which I always put myself in that billboard as well because I was born there too. So
I like it.
obviously, where Cool was born is the hometown I grew up in, and but being from there, yeah, and going to school, went to kind of small private schools growing up. When I graduated and then went to college in Marion, so still right there in Indiana. And if you ask me when I was graduating college, like if you said, "All right, you have 1,000 tries, detail your life. What is the next 10 years, 15 years of your life going to be?" In that entire 1,000 tries, I would never have included Sacramento, California. I would have never included William Jessup University because that wasn't even on my radar. I didn't even know William Jessup University existed as a school. But what I did know, and so I think that's really interesting when you're saying this kind of deficit of imagination, because I think when I graduated, we were kind of still holding on in the band era, right? So we had the imagination of, you're getting signed, going big. So we had pursuits there, but I didn't necessarily have like, oh, this is my top goal. This is where I'm going to be, and I'm shooting for it. It became more, I think once I graduated, it became more of a question of, okay, God, what is that next step you want me to take? What is that next step? And being faithful to that. And even if it looked like a small, insignificant step, which maybe interning in a youth ministry after college, which we made, I think $2 an hour if you average it out.
Yeah, I think, it was somewhere around $8,000 for the year, I believe.
Yeah, for the year. That was the entire year. And but we survived. We had an apartment. We had some youth pastor friends who would feed us, which is it's kind of interesting. So it shows us on the food chain, like we were below youth pastor. We were fed by youth pastors.
We were charity to youth pastors. Yeah,
yes.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought about that before. That was a low.
It was, but it was a good learning experience, and it built character.
Sure.
But I think in that, I had known. I think it was maybe dreams of like, okay, I know, God, you're calling me to go on to further schooling, right? So it was more like having dreams with little glimpses of them, right? Like, okay, going on to schooling, but I didn't know where that was. And it was over that year after I graduated college that program at Biola University. When I first read it, I didn't know where Biola was. It could have been anywhere, and it ended up being in Southern California. So I followed God, moved there. In even going to that school, I didn't think I was going to go work at a church, but right before I went there, an opening at a church came available. So I ended up moving to San Diego, commuting up to Biola, working at a church, and that's really where kind of the pastoral calling started being shaped. And I met my wife there, so it was kind of a good, it was a little good detour. And I would have never, again, you asked me when I graduated college, hey, where are you going to meet your wife? I would have said San Diego, California. I'd be like, I don't even live in San Diego. How would I meet her there? So it's been cool for me to look back, and I could never have written my life over these last, 17 to 18 years now being out of school. Actually, I think 20. We've been out of college for 20 years.
It's been a minute.
Graduated in 2000. Over these 20 years, I would have never been able to detail it. And so looking back, it was all of these little steps of following God and saying, what is that next step? Okay, go to school. So I'd go to school and commit to that for 3 to 4 years. And along the way, met my wife and kind of honed maybe a more pastoral calling as well, along with, a desire to teach on a college level. So I would really highlight that. Yeah, that it was, I don't know growing up if you would have said, hey, do you dream of being a theology professor? And at age 6, I'd be like, yes, that's my dream. I think it would have been more Indiana Jones. That definitely. So it's kind of, I think I'm kind of there.
Yeah.
teaching college. And we have some archaeologists on our campus, and I call them the real Indiana Jones. But, that may have been, it's like either Indiana Jones or third baseman for the Cincinnati Reds. Like that was basically, if you asked the 8-year-old Mark, that's what
Yeah.
I would have said.
With both are great options.
Yeah, which they're both great. So kind of, but I wouldn't have said, teach theology and live in Sacramento. And then just following God in these times, these small steps, right?
Yeah.
It has led me to a place where I know for a fact God has prepared me and called me for this time, for this time, for this place. And so it's been amazing to see all of these different pursuits and interests in my life come together now 20 years in the making.
I think it's so encouraging, Mark, because we say probably every week on the podcast, I believe that God has created everybody on purpose and for a purpose. And I think we can begin to especially in transitional moments of life, begin to feel almost like an anxiety around purpose or path of life. If it's like we don't have the whole thing planned out, we've got I've been chasing this dream since I was born. Here's how it's all going to work out. I mean, I forget some of our story. The fact that it's like we were pursuing a dream with everything we had. It totally, it blew up in our face in our life. But like, I forgot that we graduated. Like you're supposed to graduate from college and get like a job.
Yeah.
And I believe we graduated, moved in with your parents, and became census takers.
Yeah, we did. We worked the
census, right?
2000 census. Yeah.
Yes. Like I forget about that it's like, we're at a place where we've got a degree. We went to like a Christian university. We were pursuing a dream. Like this is when, and then you graduate. And then it's up and to the right. Things work out.
It's an upward trajectory the whole time.
Like we were census takers. Then we got just a huge uptick in pay to make $8,000 a year being interns, which neither of us went to school or had any desire to do the things that we were doing. Like the whole thing seems random, and you can almost be like, hey, did God forget about you guys? Or did you completely do a U-turn somewhere? But you're right. It's like, at every part of that step, I think what I know was consistent about us in that journey and has been consistent with you is always working from the assumption that God is with you, that he's guiding each step of the way, that we were leaning in to see what is it you're saying right now and where does that go? And he continued to be faithful to it. And you said something earlier, Mark, that I want to pull into this interview, that the process of us creating the band that we did, we had a band that was called Paradigm 5, and we toured around the nation. But there was a process in that began to plant seeds into the calling, into the process that you were in. And what I think is interesting, and this is what I want to pull together, is the band was a dream I had since I was in third grade. Like everything in my life was, God put me on earth to be a drummer in a band, and I'm going to leave Indiana or Arizona. I'm going to go to Indiana. I'm going to find some dudes to put a band together, and we're going to be the next Van Halen, right?
Exactly. That's right. It's the Van Halen dream.
It was. And my brother and I, we were like Eddie and Alex. This is the way it was going to work.
Exactly.
And everything in my life, I was betting on that's what God had called me to do. And the cool part is we found you and other guys in the band. We put this thing together, and we were in the process of it, right? We were making music. We put out a CD. We were talking to record companies, and it wasn't just about music. There was, we wanted to be a ministry. We wanted to change people's lives. But it's interesting because you kind of joined my dream that I was full force in, but you were saying, as you were talking about some of the stuff we want to talk about here, is that even joining into someone else's dream, kind of getting it midway, God was still at work in just kind of pursuing that kind of those dreams and those ideas. He was at work in your life too, in the process.
Yeah, it's really interesting for me to look back because, again, you asked 8-year-old Mark. I don't think I was allowed to listen to Van Halen at 8 years old, right? So I couldn't even form that dream.
Yeah.
But then when we met, and I would say probably at age 16, I was at a youth convention, right? So there's like 10,000 people, and it
Yep.
was the night they were doing being called into the ministry, right?
Yep.
You know, and I went in the night being like, well, this isn't for me. Like I'd never really thought about it, but that night in the service, when he asked at the end of the thing, like whoever's called into full time ministry, stand up, and I stood up. And I remember even like almost like out of body experience. I was like, "What am I standing? What just
What is
happened?"
happening?
Yeah, like who pushed me up? So I stood up, and then he said, "You know, everyone who's standing, come forward, and we want to talk to you." And then I sat back down. I sat back down, and I didn't go forward. And that was about 16, and I kind of wrestled with that. Okay, what does that mean? What does that this maybe inner feeling of a call to ministry? And
Mm.
then we, fast forward to college, about 3 or 4 years later, and meeting you and having this, who in college doesn't want to be in a band once you get to college? You're like, hey, well, that's a rite of passage. You need to be in a band. You need to play at the local coffee house that's on campus. Like you have to. Like that. This was the '90s. That was exactly what you did in the '90s.
That's true.
And but it was in the process, I think, of joining the band and seeing that it was such the dream of you and Damon, your brother, and then others. But it was also more than just band and rock and roll and fame, but there was this ministry element. And for me, and we started doing worship in youth groups and at camps. And that really, I think without that started to hone in my life by seeing your dream and like being caught by your passion. I was able to kind of join you, but it helped open up in my own life the calling to ministry and what that could look like. And it was really from that process of doing youth camps and doing that I am where I am today. Like I wouldn't be at the church in Sacramento, but I had met the lead pastor, a guy named Jeff Jennings, and his wife Lori Jennings. Met them at youth camps.
Yeah.
Because I joined your crazy dream in college to be in a band and meeting people and honing that pastoral calling or
Yeah.
ministry calling. And so, yeah, it was wild. I wouldn't have again guessed that. It wasn't something that I necessarily premeditated, but being able to join into your dream, I think is a great way to explain it. That I was able to catch your passion, and then it opened up callings in my own life.
Yeah.
And it could have gone the other way, right? I could have joined it and been like, you know what, I don't really want to be in a band, or I don't want to do ministry, but it opened up that door for me.
Well, I feel like, Mark, it's like, and since you are a theology professor and a doctor, you can make this sound a lot smarter than I'm going to right now. But it's the term that I'm hearing in my brain is like it's inertia.
Hmm.
It's like calling
Yeah.
and purpose and kingdom inertia. That it's like as you get in motion, and you're responding, and like you said, it's not like I'm saying yes to what God's going to do in 6 years. I'm going to default to if God opens a door here, I'm going to say yes to what's happening right now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's as those yeses continue to line up, it's like then you're in motion. You have that inertia of God's movement in your life, and then He's able to just, I think Wayne Jacobson talks about those gentle nudges of God's Spirit. He doesn't like come in and grab you and throw you out to like Sacramento or throw you into some different. Usually it's like you're going. You've said yes. You said this, and then He knows that He's got someone. He has a partner in this process that is willing to move forward, that is willing to say yes, and He's just able to go, a little pivot here, little nudge
Mm-hmm.
here,
Yeah.
and I don't know. I guess if you look at so many of the Bible stories, that those things are consistent. Is that people just had, a form of inertia that they were saying yes to what was in front of them.
Yeah, and I think that they also maybe what marks, especially some of the biblical characters, and I think something that I started to try to realize, later, like kind of towards the end, junior, senior year of college, was all of those maybe characters had developed a personhood or personality that was bent towards the will of God, right? And it wasn't a specific will of God. It wasn't just that specific calling. It was just they lived in a place that said, God, whatever your will is, let that be done. and I'm
Mm.
and I'm ready to go with that. And that started to become, graduating college without a specific game plan, right? Without a 15-year plan. Uh, that started to become my prayer of God. I don't know the details of my life, but I know that you are with me, and I want your will. Like, that's what I know. Like, I want your will. And then yeah, it's those little nudges, those phone calls that said, "Hey, you ever thought about coming out to Sacramento?" And we had moved back to Indiana at that time. And when I first got that phone call, my initial reaction was, I mean, I kind of laughed, and I was like, that's impossible. Like, there's no way. And then, God working on that. Actually, Henry Nouwen, in some of his writings, he talks about four characteristics of the call of God. And the first one is that that is simple, not complex, right? It's simple, which might be, hey, move to California and go to graduate school. It's not, you're going to move here, then go to San Diego, meet your wife. It's not complicated in the details. It was a simple, I mean, even though that, and the second one is, it will be seemingly impossible, right? When you first hear it, you're like,
Mm.
well, that I can't. And that was the call to Sacramento. I was like, well, we had just moved cross country. We have now a son, or two sons. We have a baby. Um, that's seemingly impossible. And the third one for now on is that it'll be persistent. It's not just a one-time feeling, but it is that like you're saying, a gentle nudge and a gnawing. And I think for me, right, from age 16 to age 26, probably when I really entered uh into like a full-time pastor position that wasn't youth ministry, that it was just this underlying feeling of, I've called you for something, right? I've called you to be in ministry, even though I didn't know what that looked like, but it was persistent. It wasn't just, the fad. And then the fourth one, just for fun, since we're doing this, right, Darren, which I love that Nouwen highlights this, is that your calling will always include others, not just yourself.
Mm.
It'll always be for the benefit of others, right? So if God is calling you to something, that call will benefit others, not just yourself, right? So, and I think that's a good way to measure calls, because Sacramento, there were some personal benefits of that at the time, but there was also some things that were negative, and um, but there was this, maybe a community you can come out and minister to, right? There's other callings. It wasn't just like, oh, I'm going to take this job because it gives me more money and gives me more status, right? It's not, God's calling is not self-focused, but will always be others focused as well.
Well, Mark, I think that comes back to, and I love that you shared those 4 points. And if you're listening, write them down, because those are guideposts to get to where
Mhm.
God's leading you. And I love that the persistent. I think about I was just talking to somebody the other day about COVID, and and one of the things I said was that it's coming back from, I believe it's in Romans, where it talks about that God's gifts and His call are irrevocable.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? And that, like coronavirus or some failure in your life or whatever, like you can't cancel God's call on your life. Like, it may shift, it may change, it may be delayed, it may take a little bit of a detour, but like, y- God is faithful. He's persistent. He's going to continue to come back in gentle and loving ways to invite you into that process. And I think one of the things that you talked about as well, Mark, that I want to get, and I think it's a great bridge right now, is you said there was a part where you shifted your focus in pursuing God's call in your life from, God, what do you want me to do, to more of, God, who do you want me to become?
Mhm.
And in a way, that I've said it before, is that sometimes I feel like maybe I know I do. I know sometimes I get too concerned about what God's like calling is for career.
Yep.
And because that's sexier, that's more fun, right? That's the glitz, that's the glam, maybe it's the money, it's the stuff.
Mhm.
But he's infinitely more concerned and interested in character. But
Yeah, and it's the
that's
question
it.
that was the question that people ask you first, right? Is, what do you do? Right? I mean, when you meet someone at a party or a gathering, and it's always we go there not, hey, who are you? Right? I mean, which would actually be kind of weird at a party if someone came up to you and was like, "Who are you?" Deep down inside, it'd be
Yeah.
like,
What are you
"We're
becoming?
just we're just meeting. Let's stick with what do I do, and then we'll
I
get
like
there."
ranch dip, and I'm gonna go get some more of that.
Exactly. But in our lives, yeah, I think we have to make that transition from just often when we think about like God's will for our life, we think of it in terms of career or function. God, what are you calling me to do? And I think that when you look biblically, there's so much of a call of God asking us to become a type of person. And in many ways, it's that baseline level of becoming a type of person who will follow God no matter where that goes, whether it's an upward trajectory or whether it moves into times of struggle. And so having that shift in my life kind of helped because it definitely took pressure off of, okay, what am I going to do next? Even though it's a continual move forward, right? You know, you're still moving, and it was okay, God, yeah, I'm going to graduate school now. I know I'm going to be here for a season, and then maybe move back and did some other things in Indiana, and then moved to Sacramento to work in the church. And so it was moving forward, but it was also not. Uh, it didn't. I didn't maybe then, which we always face this temptation, right, to find our identity in what we do, right? Um, but being able to shift that and saying, okay, is my identity more in who I am becoming and who God has called me to become, like the type of person. Therefore, no matter what I'm doing, I know I am doing God's will.
Well, Mark, I don't think I've ever thought about this one before, and so I'm so glad you've taken us down this path. But I think we get so caught up in like, am I going to miss God's call,
Yeah.
God's plan? But here's the deal in my life. I don't know that I've ever missed God's call, but I can tell you this: I've almost ruined my life multiple times because of lack of character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Where,
And
yeah.
I'm obsessed about calling and plans and where it's going. And I think you're right. We get asked that. What do you do? What's the thing? And it's like, you can pursue calling, but if you don't develop character, you will sabotage your life. But if you
Mm-hmm.
pursue character development, you'll never miss God's call in your life.
Yep. Yeah, because you become the type of person who is in tune with God, right? Who's in tune with God, so you can hear those subtle nudges and that simple, persistent calling from God as you becoming a person who is putting God first, right, and focusing on character and more of the inner life. Yeah, you become the type of person that then, oh wow, I maybe would have missed this opportunity if I was thinking about other things like personal gain or and fame, things like that. But oh, I hear God, you saying this, and maybe even on paper it looks a little bit crazy, but I maybe focused on trying to hear from you, God, and I can't deny that this is coming from you.
Mark, you focus a lot of your attention. I mean, you're a theology professor, but you've done a lot with spiritual formations through the years. You work with college students right now. You work with the, adults at the church. What are some practical, thoughts that you've seen as far as learning to hear the voice of God? We're using that phrase. We use that terminology a lot. I've
Yeah.
never heard an audible voice of God in my life. I've been
Right.
pursuing his call and in development of my character for 42 years now. Well, not 42, it was probably more like the 8 years worth. But anyway,
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But we don't hear God's voice, but we are led by his spirit within our spirit. And so what are some ways that we can develop a sensitivity and ability to understand and respond?
Yeah, definitely. And I think as I answer this, I always want to point out, and I try to point out with students, like if we actually did hear the audible voice of God, it actually might scare us more than invite us into a conversation,
It's
right?
true.
We'd be like, oh my goodness, what is happening? So we always I think we kind of want that in our lives. Like we just want God to tell us. But if he did, like if he shouted at us, we'd be like, oh no.
Yeah.
So I think and I think God knows that, and that's why He speaks to us in different ways. Like and I think the main way, and one of the main practical ways of hearing the voice of God is you have to develop rhythms in your life that you pause, that you go into a place of silence, that you cut out all of the noise, so that you can hear God. It's that great image in the Bible with Elijah where God is speaking to him, but he doesn't come in the wind, he doesn't come into in the storm, the loud thunder. But it's that gentle whisper, right? That even that the Hebrew behind there is almost like an inaudible sound, right? It's so silent, and to be able to do that, you have to develop space in your life where you have solitude and silence, where you can hear that. That's why I'm just such a proponent of the Christian disciplines and being able to separate yourself. And what's funny is sometimes in the church, and especially the evangelical church, we talk a lot about quiet time with God, right? Quiet time with God, do your devotionals. But even then, we can focus on our devotionals as what do we need to do during that time, right? Like, oh, I need to read this or read this many pages. But but again, not even focusing on that quiet time as that, but actually maybe being quiet and saying, God, I want to hear from you. I want to cut out the noise. Um, and again, not hearing an audible voice of God, but I think having those times of solitude and silence, what you will find is your brain is still going to be going crazy, right? And it takes you a while, but all those things coming to your mind, you can just take those to God in prayer and be like, God, this keeps coming up. Maybe this person at work keeps coming to mind, or this situation I was in at work. And I'm wondering if I dealt with that right or that. And maybe God starts to hone in your heart or highlight like, oh yeah, maybe you had a little bit of pride in that moment, right? And you need to go talk to that person or with your family. But I think that's one of the big things is I think we all want to hear from God, but often we don't have any space in our life to actually talk to God and to hear from him in terms of like solitude and silence. I mean, it'd be like being in a relationship with someone and you're always running by him like 100 miles an hour and be like, hey, I love you, I want to talk to you. And then you just keep going. And the person's like, I'm right here. Anytime you want to pause, I think that's the first and biggest way, and maybe the biggest way that we struggle because we are so busy and we just tend to fill our lives with so many things that we don't have that space to be with God.
I think it's true, Mark, and I think we're getting increasingly worse at it. I think as a culture,
Hmm.
I remember a couple months ago, I checked the my phone usage thing that it has, you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
the screen time.
Yeah, and it even like I remember seeing a thing about how often we pick up our phone,
Hmm.
and I've noticed it, and it convicts me often, and it's just like it almost becomes habitual. You know what I mean? It's like you get a moment to stop, and it's like, and then you find yourself like, I don't even know what I'm doing. I'm just
Right.
distracting myself.
Yeah.
And I've been doing some more and more study on the Enneagram, and we're looking to add it to the spiritual DNA online course. And one of the things for a type 7 that is so crucial is embracing the spiritual discipline of silence
Yeah.
and being able to quiet the noises in your head and be able to just. And so it's one thing I love that you brought up the disciplines is I've been trying to discipline myself, and every morning I have time to just breathe, embrace silence. I've been trying to, even now when I drive, trying to have at least one of my go-to or my return trip from work, no music, no anything of just, I mean, there's noise from the traffic, but just, I mean,
Yep.
20-25 minutes of just silence. And you're right, is there are times that you have thoughts, you have things that are going on, your brain doesn't shut off, but it's even in those moments where I've tried to embrace, what I've been taught to understand that the compassionate curiosity, even about those voices and then what's going on, is not be like,
Hmm.
oh, I'm trying to be godly here and be quiet and all these thoughts. I'm so stupid. Like, no, be compassionate, but get
Yeah.
curious. Like you're saying, like, why do I keep thinking about that person? Why does that thought keep popping into my head? And it's amazing as we lean into that, like, is God going to go, well, it's because I want you to know this. And let me explain to you in 6 months how this is all going to work out. No, like you
Right.
said, in that moment, he'll say, here's the next step. Here's the next thought. But man, that we're not going to do that accidentally, are we?
No, yeah, not at all. I mean, I think that's the biggest key in the spiritual life is realizing that it doesn't happen by accident. It takes intentionality, and that's anything in our life. You want to learn a language, you want to learn an instrument, play a sport, you have to be intentional. You have to train. And in the spiritual life is the same way. You want to develop your inner life, you have to be intentional, which means you have to put time. We have to put time behind it. And I think that first step, right, of creating time and space in your life to hear from God, can kind of combo then with another one, which that's also having people in your life who you can talk to this about. Right, it's community. It's not solitude versus community, but it's both. Right, it's this
Both and.
rhythm. Yeah, it's this rhythm between having moments of solitude and then being in a community where you can have friends and even maybe pastors in your life or leaders in your life who can speak into your life and say, "Hey, I see this experience you're going through, and this is maybe what God's telling me about that." And so it's this both. You have solitude to hear from God, but you also have friends to help you process that as well.
Yeah, it brings me back, Mark, to a quote I think Dallas Willard said, where he says that that grace isn't opposed to effort; it's opposed to earning.
Mm,
And I always love that quote to realize that, yeah, like we're not saying that you do these things so you can get God to like you or get God to forgive you. You're not
right.
earning salvation or God's favor, but there's effort into this. It's not a
Yep.
magic trick, right?
Right. Yeah. And Willard, even I love Willard, and he even says that he says, in the church, there's kind of much magical thinking that if we just kind of go to church, hear enough good sermons, we'll just somehow magically become who God wants us to be. And he stresses, no, it takes that effort, and it takes us putting something into that and being intentional about how we're using our time and the communities we're in and the voices we're allowing maybe in.
I love the community part too, Marcus. What I'm thinking about is our friendship now for over 20 years is we're very, very different people.
Yeah, yeah.
Like almost as different as they come. But you're one of my dearest friends on the planet. And one thing that I've loved being your friend is that you have done so much as far as helping me develop who I am in Christ. You've helped me develop so much in my love and my relationship with Jesus because you go about it in such a different way than I do. In so many of the things that I need to grow in, you do naturally through all the years of living with you and rooming with you and just watching your life. Like you practice solitude, you practice silence, your thirst for knowledge and for reading and for like, I observed your life and this idea of you have people around you that you can, bounce things off of, but you also have people that you can absorb part of
Mm,
who they are in parts where you're not and and I think sometimes we can watch that, we can envy it and be like, you know what I mean? Well, and I think in some of our immaturity in youth, it was like, we would get in arguments or it'd be annoying because you do
right,
things so
right.
differently than I do.
Yeah,
But, and
yeah.
then in maturity, be able to come to the place and realizing like, no, like, if I'm going to become who God's created me to be, both in action and in character, like I know there are things that God has gifted and that marked as naturally that I need to grow in. I think that's a part of the gift of community that we have as well. And I just want to thank you for all the years of being able to kind of draft off of your momentum, in Christ that has helped me so much, man.
Hey, thank you. And listeners, you've heard it here, right? Darren thanking me for all the past, everything I've done. But what you say, Darren, too, is that on my end, it's the same way, right? Because we were different. And yeah, in our immaturity, that caused points of tension when we were younger. But now being able to look back on it and be like, no, you helped me grow in areas where I wasn't good at, right? And that's where we need each other, right? We have these differences, that helps us. I'm maybe good at solitude, but not always good at community because I'm more drawn to solitude, and I need to be drawn into community. And people who are maybe on the community side need to be drawn into being able to have that silence and solitude. So no, it's great how we work together, and how we work together as human beings, even like that in our differences. It actually, maybe not viewing them as points of contention, but actually, wow, that's someone else helping me grow in an area that I'm just not good at.
Which I think, Mark, if our whole life, bringing this conversation full circle, if we're constantly enamored and only focused on the doing side of calling,
Mm-hmm.
now people are problems, people are resources, people are things that either aid or abet and get in the way of me pursuing and doing what I want to do and accomplishing what I want to accomplish. But if I see the real gold is who I'm becoming, now all of a sudden people are resources and opportunity to grow, to love, to be loved, to learn. It shifts the trajectory of my life and my relationships.
Yeah, it fundamentally changes how you view others, and even how you view yourself.
Yeah. Mark, we need to land the plane, but I love the depth that you bring. I know that you have a podcast yourself where you get into these topics and even deeper ones. Tell us about how people can get connected and stay connected to you on the podcast.
Yeah, I'm a host of a podcast at William Jessup University called Jessup Think. And so you can find that wherever podcasts are available. You can also go to jessup.edu/think, and kind of see our most recent episodes. But that's been great. We've been able to kind of interview different people. We have different scholars and authors. We've had Jemar Tisby, who just wrote the book Color of Compromise, come on and talk about racial injustice and the church. Other theologians, just interviewed a guy named Kelly Kapic, who wrote a book on a theological meditation of pain and suffering, kind of embodied hope. And it was a great conversation with both of them. And so it's fun. And so, if you're listening to this and you want to hear some more, you can check out Jessup Think. You can just search Jessup Think where you find your podcasts.
I love it. And if you've gone through Spiritual DNA, maybe you're a Spiritual DNA alum and you've come through and you have a spiritual pathway in intellection or contemplative, if you're a teacher guardian and those are more of your strengths, the kind of content that Mark's putting out, this is going to be right in your aisle, right down the lane of helping you think deeply, helping you have more of a contemplative theological view. And it's important to find resources that are going to connect directly to you and give you a shot of energy and spiritual momentum. On the other hand, if you're very much different than that, one of the positives of that is being able to lean into things that may not be your natural thought. If you're not a deep thinker and you think, I want to talk about theology, whatever. Yeah, you want to, because it's amazing as you begin to learn either from things that you are like or things that you're opposite for. The pursuit of knowledge and truth is always going to lead you into something new that God wants to do in and through you. And so, Mark, I love it. You guys can get Mark's podcast there. And Mark, I'm gonna we got to have you on again because I want to hear. I know you have this theory of aging that I want you to unpack in our next. I'm intrigued by this.
That'll be good. We'll save that as a teaser for the next episode.
Dude, I love you to death, Mark. Can't wait to see you in person sometime soon, man. Thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Definitely. Thank you so much for having me.
And we're back. Oh, man. That portal into the Storyland is just so good. But it's so good to be back with you guys. Yeah, I think we only used one sound effect in the whole thing. I want to apologize. I feel like that I could have taken the energy to another level. I'm going to try to just amp it up a little bit the rest of the time. I think is the last episode you've listened with the Ben Cooley episode. I got thrown out. I was all thrown out of whack. He was so fired up. He was so energetic. I just felt like I can't match that. I don't know what to do. I can't jump around over here. I can't do jumping jacks, right? I got to keep it focused. But I'm going to try to take a level here. Good stuff with Mark Moore. Mark, thanks so much for being on here. We talked about the end of the interview. Check out his podcast. He's actually got a book called The Rhythm of Prayer that's out as well. I think you can find it on Amazon. It's a great book. And Mark hits there in the interview. I want to reiterate this. We'll put this in the show notes as well. But the 4 steps to pursue God's call in your life. And he got these from Henry Nouwen. Such good material out there from Henry Nouwen. But he said that these 4 steps are this. The pursuing God's call, it's simple. When God begins to speak, when we're talking about, God, what's that next step? What's the next thing you want me to do? And if you're at the place where you feel like, okay, I'm growing in my understanding and my love of God. I'm learning to trust the character of God. I'm learning to actually walk in relationship and being with him. And now I want to move in that next step. How does God begin to speak? How does he begin to lead? These 4 steps, right? It's a simple thing. Sometimes it's so simple you think that can't be from God because it sounds something like call that person or read that book or listen to Darren's podcast all of the time. I mean, usually that is what God says. I think that is usually, I had to find a reason to use my laugh track. Anyway, you do, right? You have these moments where God is, what he's saying, it's simple. Mark says, the step 2 right there from Henry Nouwen, it's seemingly impossible. Oh, there's no way I could do that. It's seemingly impossible, but it's persistent. It's persistent. God finds multiple ways to communicate to us. If you've walked with God for a while, you'll see how this works, right? You have a moment where you have this thought, this simple thought that pops into your head. You think, that's weird. It seems a little bit, maybe seemingly impossible. I couldn't really do that. And then that next week, you're reading a Bible scripture, a Bible passage or a story, and something jumps out and you go, oh, man, that kind of reminds me of that. And then all of a sudden you hear a song that is hitting these same things. And then all of a sudden you're, like maybe God's telling you to go talk to a friend in Kentucky or I don't know, something. And all of a sudden you're watching TV and the Kentucky Wildcats are on. You're like, this is persistent. Everywhere I go, it's Kentucky. Or it's a conversation with someone. God is persistent because he's not playing hide and seek from us. And if you're at a place right now where you feel like, listen, God's playing hide and seek from me. He's kind of vindictive. He doesn't want me to be able to do the things that I love. I want to encourage you. That might mean you need to spend a little more time developing, understanding his character and developing your character. Because when you get to the place of know him in his heart, you can trust that he's going to be simple. He's going to seemingly give you the impossible because it's not something you can do. It's something that he does through you, right? It's persistent. And this last one, it benefits others. It's not just for your benefit. It's actually a way that you serve and love others, that you bring the kingdom of heaven to earth, right? We pray that God, your will be done, right? That heaven will come to earth through what we do. And so it doesn't just benefit you. And one of the things that Mark talks about in here, and I want to encourage you with this may be one of the more practical podcasts we've had, is I want to encourage you to start taking a look at spiritual disciplines. Richard Foster has a lot of good stuff on spiritual disciplines. Dallas Willard has good stuff on it. Henry Nouwen has good stuff on it. Begin Googling and looking up Christian spiritual disciplines. If you've never got involved in the spiritual disciplines, some of them are like a couple of, study can be one, fasting can be one, solitude, silence. Mark hits on some of those. Simplicity. They are disciplines, things that you choose to do that empower you through God's Spirit to do things that you regularly wouldn't be able to. These disciplines are the things that actually begin to transform who we are. And I agree with what Mark said. There was a quote from Dallas Willard, right? That there's a lot of magical thinking in the church today, where basically if you just go to church and you say the right thing, you show up 30 minutes a day and you sing the right song and you say the right prayer, that poof, magic. You're just going to see God change your life and you're going to be able to step into the calling that God has for you. God's power in our life is supernatural, but it's not magic. And if we can take this out of the spiritual realm and think about it in the physical, right? I can't go to LA Fitness for an hour a week and sing a song about weight loss and sing a song about lifting weights and sing a song about not eating cheeseburgers and pizza all day. Talk to people about that. Maybe even wear a shirt that says LA Fitness on it. I'm not going to lose any weight or be able to lift any more weights. And sometimes I think when we think about if church attendance like that, well, I'm going to church and I'm hearing these things, I'm singing these songs on Sunday for an hour, there should be a massive transformation. I should be moving in much greater faith. My hope should be through the roof. I shouldn't be having to work with anxiety or depression anymore. And I think I should be loving people that are really unloving. And I'm not sure why I'm not becoming more generous or why, it's not a magic trick. It's a relationship with God where when you grow in becoming who he's created you to be and developing his character in you, and most of that is done through disciplines. The greatest growth in my life has come when I've been involved in deeper study, in deeper fasting, and taking the spiritual disciplines and actually working them in my life. Spiritual disciplines produce spiritual fruit, and it's as you grow in becoming the kind of person that naturally exudes the fruit of God's Spirit that you find yourself doing the work of God, and that's the exciting stuff that gets you pumped up, that you want to be a part of. But it doesn't come like magic. It comes through the process of discipline, finding the discipline and the rhythms of life that you need to make sure you're having time with God, time with yourself, and time with people that are running this race with you as well. And that's what we're doing here on the podcast. That's why I love when you guys listen. We're walking together. We're trying to do our best to expose you to people who are on this same path, that are walking this road to become who God's created them to be. We want to inspire you. We want to give you the resources. We want to help you begin to expand your imagination, encourage your discipline, to seek after becoming the kind of person who will naturally step in to God's call in their life because you've developed His character within you. Here's the good news. God's not in a hurry to see that happen in your life. I need to hear that a lot because I want to be fixed. I want to be cured. I want to be on to the next thing. And it's taken a lot longer than I wanted it to. And every day I wake up, it's just another opportunity to step into it. So embrace it, friends. God's not in a hurry, but He's also not a magician. Embrace the disciplines, embrace the rhythms, embrace the existing with God and becoming who you were born to be every single day. God bless you. I love you. It means the world to me that you join us each and every week here on the podcast. And until we talk to you again, remember these three things. God is for you, not against you. God is near you, not far from you. And God has created you on purpose and for purpose. We'll talk to you next week right here on the Darren Earlywine Podcast.